Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome, I am Tara King, and I am the Higher Education Project Manager at AAU. We're happy to have you join us today for our final session of AAU's Summer Conversation Series on Doctoral Education. The Wheel Bazaar virtual series has been featuring cross-cutting topics that are important for improving doctoral education. And our aim for each session is for it to be a time where we can share ideas and innovations that are happening across our campuses so that we can learn from one another and not need to reinvent the wheel when we face similar challenges. We are happy to have you with us today and look forward to your engagement. So the Wheel Bazaar series is in support of AAU's PhD Education Initiative. In this effort, AAU works in partnership with our member campuses to make doctoral education more student-centered. In particular, the initiative has a focus on creating more equitable educational environments for current and prospective PhD students, so that all students can thrive as they pursue their educational goals and explore the full range of doctoral career pathways. We're very excited to have with us today 3 colleagues who will be sharing efforts and strategies their departments are advancing to promote more equitable and inclusive practices in their departments. We're pleased to have Bill Epling, Professor and Chair of the Chemical Engineering Department at the University of Virginia, Josèe Dupuis, Professor and Chair of the Biostatistics Department at Boston University, and Alison Frazier, Associate Professor and Graduate Advisor of the History Department at the University of Texas at Austin. We're very grateful for their participation today and sharing their ideas and experiences. So we've structured the panel so that speakers will have 5 to 7 minutes each for their remarks. Then my colleague Emily Miller will pick up the moderation for today's session and facilitate a discussion in which panelists will address some cross-cutting questions, including questions from the audience. So we encourage you at any time throughout the presentations to post your questions in the chat. After this Q&A period, if time and numbers allow, we'll open up Zoom breakout rooms so that audience members can have deeper dive conversations with panelists. So without further ado, I would like to turn the program over to our speakers. And Bill, you're up first. Thank you for joining us today. I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you everybody for joining. So today I'm gonna tell a little story, I guess, in terms of what we've been doing here in chemical engineering at University of Virginia. And that story starts out a few years ago now. Usually twice a year, we have a town hall with our graduate students. And in that town hall, it's just kind of an open forum for us to discuss changes in policies around grounds or within the department, but also to allow them to ask questions and to help us think together about things we can do together. And one of the questions that came up was, where do professors learn how to mentor? And that was kind of a bold question coming from a student, kind of out in the open. It's like, and kind of made us think, why are they asking this question? And so what we decided to do was, well, maybe we need to think about our mentoring practices within the department and strengthen those. And so it led us to think about a survey of what skills we might be missing, what are they looking for? But we're chemical engineers, we're not survey makers, right? We're not Survey Monkey experts or anything like that. And so we started thinking about, okay, who around University of Virginia might be able to help us, or outside of University of Virginia. And we're pretty lucky because UVA engineering is surrounded by, UVA is a liberal arts school with a good engineering school inside of it, right? And so one of those schools is the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, and we found out that they had an executive leadership series or set of courses in there, and they're social psychologists. And so when we met them, they were like, no, doing surveys is what we do. This is how we function. These are how we do our research. And so they developed a survey for us, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But ultimately, since then, and this is part of the story, is since then, this group of people led by Professor Gabe Adams, who's an absolute rock star in the Batten School, have come to be champions for leadership development and professional development for our students and faculty, not just in the department now, but the whole School of Engineering. So this has really blossomed quite a bit. So next slide. And so the survey results, how did this end up blossoming, I guess? So there was a lot of questions about mentoring, and they weren't actually bad. And so we're like, okay, we're not that bad at mentors, but we kind of got some momentum going in this. And so the team from Baton, who is all about leadership mainly, right, is what they profess, but they gave us a 5-hour seminar series on mentoring best practices in a lab environment mainly. And so got a lot out of that, and it also got us comfortable with that team, right? So now we knew them, they knew us. And from the survey, we saw some other issues, right? And so I picked some random questions from the survey, and these are the real numbers that were pulled out of our survey. It was about 65 graduate students that responded, and it was a very high percentage, but that was incentivized with Grubhub cards. And so the team from Batten's made the survey and analyzed the survey. We don't know who responded and didn't respond, et cetera. And there should have been no surprise. There's a gender-based difference in the responses. And this is very common in the STEM fields, but you always hope that you're not part of that data, right? But now we had local data, and this really kind of invigorated the department going, wait a minute, these are our students. So we can't, it's not like we can say, well, that's the rest of the US. These are our students, this is our department. And so now we have this local data. So next slide. So from that, we developed more training sessions with the team from Batten, still led by Gabe, but now she was bringing other people and other teammates to help us work through these. And so for the faculty level, we had a series of workshops that were based on gender in the STEM fields. For our graduate students, we had a series of workshops that was called Skills for Career Success. But in those, we included some diversity and equity aspects to those. And so these are kind of the topics that I've listed here for those. And there's been several other one-off follow-up sessions from these on various topics. And that includes sessions from doctors in the School of Medicine who are stress management experts. But the key here was we found local expertise, and that grew, right? And so now it's not just in chemical engineering, it's through the whole School of Engineering. We've looked outside of Batten and found other experts in different areas that are really helping our students. And because it's internal and local, it's very cost effective as well, right? So these are people we get to work with directly here on grounds. So next slide. And so just one last quick kind of, I guess, waving the flag for the Batten team. This is something that Professor Adams put together for me for this talk to kind of advertise what they do. They don't just work on grounds. So I think one of the groups that they've worked with recently is the South Korean embassy, right? They did leadership training for them. So it's a varied groups of people that they work with. But in terms of equity training, right, they're looking at developing leadership skills for the diverse and divided world. And then they have a lot of emphasis on the equity and inclusion aspects. They are social psychologists. They look at hard data. They use hard data in the work that they do, and a lot of organizational leadership and aspects behind it. And then, like I said, they've developed lots of programs for faculty that range from a 1-hour workshop to 10 to 20-hour workshops, depending on the topic. And they're very good at tuning them for the department as they learn about you individually. And so with that, that's kind of my story in terms of what we've done over the last couple of years working with people that surround us every day and their expertise.
Thanks so much, Bill. We have Josèe up next. Oh, I'm sorry, Josèe, you're on mute.
That will help. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today, to tell you a little bit about our experience in the Biostatistics department at Boston University with our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee activities. Next slide, please. So in 2019, we formed a department Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. The university has a lot of other committees on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there's a lot of activities at the university level, even in the School of Public Health. The School of Public Health has a lot of activities. And we were wondering, like, is there really a need for a department committee? And the committee has really focused on issues that are more related to biostatistics, and I'll give some examples of that. And it's complementary to other efforts that are ongoing at the university level. So it includes faculty, staff, and one student representative. And the charge to the committee was to review the department practices with a lens towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. The first thing that the committee asked is that we reserve 10 to 15 minutes for a DEI discussion during the monthly department meetings. And I thought that was a great suggestion. A lot of the DEI activities that are ongoing at the university are optional, and most of the people who show up at these activities are the same people, maybe not the ones that we want to sensitize to these issues. Our department meeting, the culture in my department is that everybody attends the department meeting. So it was a way to making sure that everybody was at the table when these discussions happen. At first, we put the DEI discussion at the end of the meeting, and we would always run out of time. And I felt that was not giving it the priority that I wanted. So now we start the department meetings with the DEI discussion. And here are some of the discussions we've had over the past year and a half. First in person and then moving to Zoom format. So we created a repository of diverse data set. So Boston University is the home of the Framingham Heart Study. A lot of our teaching examples use the Framingham Heart Study, a cohort collected in 1948 in the suburb of Boston, who is entirely white. Students were complaining about the lack of diversity in our examples. So we've created more diverse data set. We reached out to the Jackson Heart Study, for example, a African-American cohort, and we've had added more diverse data sets. And we now have a library that instructors can go to and select data sets to be used in the classroom so that we have more diversity in the class, in the data set, and that people can see, the students can see themselves in the data set. Another discussion that we've had, which is very biostatistics centric, is the use of race as a covariate in statistical analysis. What does it mean to adjust for race? And race is a social construct that includes so many other, it sometimes can represent socioeconomic status, it can represent systemic racism, it represents so much things. So we need to be precise what it means that when we use race in our models, and what are the consequences of race adjustment. We discussed a paper where adjusting for race led to undertreatment for kidney disease in African Americans. So we need to be really conscious of what it means in our biostatistics model. Next slide, please. We had a student come and talk to us about an article from the New York Times titled, "I was a low-income college students, classes were on the hard part." And this was led by one of our PhD students, and it was really eye-opening to see all of the struggles that some of our students face. We also had a session on pronouns, why they are so important and why we need to get them right. And this was led by an advisor to the Boston University School of Public Health Queer Alliance. And by all of these, I'm hoping to equip faculty with the tools that they need to make their classroom more inclusive and fair and equitable. Once we went into online mode with the pandemic, we had a session on inclusive pedagogy, and especially a very interesting conversation on should we require the cameras to be on and reasons why we may not want to make that a requirement. And also ways to engage students so that even though we're online, to make sure that they have opportunities to participate, that they feel included, that they feel part of the community. Next slide, please. However, even though I was doing that for the students to create a better environment in the classroom, the students came to me and asked, "What are you doing for DEI?" Because it was happening at department meetings for faculty and staff, it was not obvious to students. So we started a journal club for students and faculty. One of our first journal club was discussing the legacy of R.A. Fisher, who's a geneticist and statistician, who's done the father of a lot of statistical methods that we teach, but also the father of eugenics. And one of the papers we discussed was really defending R.A. Fisher. And I can tell you it was a very emotional discussion. And it was led by the DEI committee very appropriately, and it was very interesting to hear all of the points, and the students were really appreciative to be able to be part of the conversation. Next slide, please. The DEI committee also held listening tours. There are sessions for students only who can come and tell us about practices that they feel may not be ideal in our department. It's attended by a few members from the DEI committee, and there's also an available anonymous feedback form for concerns or suggestion, and we're very responsive to that. I also once a semester have a dinner with the chair where I meet with students and they can provide anonymous questions before that meeting that I can answer. Next slide, please. The outcome of this DEI committee, even though people question, do we really need a department-wide one when we have so many resources at the university level? I think it's been extremely positive. It's raised awareness of DEI issues among faculty and staff, and especially among instructors, so that they can take steps to make their classrooms more inclusive. We are using more diverse examples in our biostatistics classes, and we're making sure that we use the correct pronouns. And also it's created a way, ways for students to contribute to the DEI committee. They can volunteer to be a member of the committee and they can provide feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Josèe. And our third speaker today is Alison Frazier. And we also encourage participants, if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat, as Emily will consider them as she facilitates a discussion after Alison is done speaking. Alison?
Thank you. Thank you to my panelists and also to the AAU for this wonderful series of panels, lots and lots to think about and learn from one another. So we're here today, particularly to talk about equity, and it's useful to remember that it's a goal, it's not really achievable, and also that it's a structural problem, and for that reason requires a kind of ecological approach that will have individual outcomes. So it's a complex thing to be addressing in that sense. We try to start the day in the graduate program by acknowledging two basic virtues, or values better. The first is intentional communications, and the second is transparency to the best of our ability. So let me just say that we try to create as many kinds of venues for faculty-student exchange as we can. So some very ad hoc things, some regular cohort meetings, an annual state of finances meeting to which the graduate students are given the data. And this past year with the pandemic, we've had great success with town halls, and a lot of those have been called by students, by the graduate students, to talk about their concerns as, you know, the crisis unfolded. For transparency, of course, I have to say we do the best we can at a large public university with a highly articulated bureaucracy. There's often a lot we don't know ourselves, but we promise them the best of our ability. And together, these two values, communications and transparency, do two things. They keep us aimed at opportunity for all, and they help us build a grad program that welcomes student voices. I'm going to focus on the history department, but as I said, and that local situation is situated in a larger ecology, and our success depends on the broader environment. So we have a graduate school that's very important to us and very active. We have a relatively new dean, Mark Smith. The College of Liberal Arts has a new dean and very active. The Department of History has instated an equity committee in the last couple of years that's been very active. And the history grad program sits enfolded in all those things. And that group of entities supported recent hiring of 2 new Mexican-American faculty and 2 new African-American faculty. We are already among the most diverse departments on campus, and these hires underscored our commitment to our grad students from underrepresented groups. In line with that, UT Austin is now eligible for Hispanic serving institution status with at least 25% of undergrads Latino. That's going to have an impact on our TA situation, so we're really excited to see how this comes into fruition. So for grad student, I'm going to skip that. Professionalization centers on campus are something else we really depend on. Perhaps the first and most important one is the Texas Career engagement center that was founded by Annie Maxfield. You've had her already on this program. And she's one of the people who helped to design the Imagination PhD, which I hope you're using in your program as early as possible. Her group focuses on grad student prep for all kinds of job markets. And she recently organized special sessions for BIPOC and first-gen students on writing for the public and on getting articles published. The second professionalization center I want to mention is the Faculty Innovation Center, run by Molly Hatcher from our very active School of Education. And the focus there is on teaching skills for students and getting certifications of different kinds for students of pedagogical training. And then we have a very large main library that houses a graduate writing center, which runs itself all kinds of workshops and retreats and has a very active DEI component. So there's a lot of work going on campus, as I'm sure this is true for your campuses too. Within the department, we have, I want to just mention two big things. One is our award-winning history e-magazine called Not Even Past, currently run by Adam Klulow. And it publishes all kinds of grad student work, faculty work, outsider work. It includes the range of kinds of media that you would expect on such a thing. And it has a special dedication to helping K through 12 teachers in Texas. So a regional focus, helping those teachers get their history right and up to date. We also have an Institute for Historical Studies, currently run by Jorge Canizares Esquera. The theme for the Institute this year, it's a kind of internal think tank, is race and caste. And that was chosen by our department's equity committee. So that's going to be a very active place for our grad students to be working. Several of them have got fellowships with it. Now I want to turn away from campus to our professional organization. For historians, that's the American Historical Association, the AHA, which along with the MLA has been at the forefront of rethinking graduate education and training. Three areas central to our equity work are key here. The first is the career development work that started way back before 2015, and which we have really taken good advantage of. We've won program funding from them for multiple years, and we've been able to appoint a grad student career development fellow who founded a career development grad student committee. So now career development is something that the grad students can actively plan with us. The second thing is mentoring. That goes right alongside career development always. And we've been emphasizing with the AHA, thinking more broadly about different kinds of mentoring, different times and types of mentoring, and making clear how fundamental that is to the success of first generation and underrepresented groups. And the third is HGSC activism. So our graduate students organize themselves into a council, and for a long time, it was a very, very useful social group. But with prompting from the AHA, our History Grad Student Council has become actively innovative and engaged, shaping grad student well-being. These three things have been a focus for our pursuit of equity across the board. And our commitment was recently put to the test in an interesting way. In late June 2020, in the wake of the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter protests and the murder of George Floyd, our grad students formed an anti-racism action committee and submitted a list of demands to the department aimed precisely at creating equitable conditions for students from all underrepresented minorities. And this is one of those situations where town halls turned out to be a very, very profitable way of working, given the big give and take flow that happens in those. So our faculty reviewed the document and replied quite promptly. We found merit in virtually every demand. We classed the demands by the degree to which the department could assert control over solving the issue, because some of them required legislative action, for instance. And the Anti-Racism Action Committee continues now and will take up the list again in the fall. We have, last year, one of our responses was to set up a 10-year position for equity on outreach. And the university responded, the graduate school responded by making that a 20-hour position funded by them, and they gave away 6 of those positions across the university. So we saw, in other words, our students' self-organization, presentation to the departments meditating on it, and the changes we made having a direct impact across the university, thanks to our professional organization. Thank you all.
Thank you all for your remarks. Alison, Bill, and Josèe, it was really wonderful to hear the work that you've had advanced in your department. I was going to take some time now to present some questions to the panel and the panelists. Those who are on the line, if there's anything, a reflection or a comment or a question, please feel free to use the chat. I'll actively monitor that as we progress through the conversation. To me, it struck me in all of your remarks that when during this time, you have really thought about persons who've been excluded based on ethnicity or race, or those who have been historically marginalized, whether from higher education or from your discipline. And you've really worked hard as a community in your department to have some communication and transparency in the conversations among your faculty and with your graduate students. Could you give advice to other departments on how to, on beginning those conversations and making them be priority within your department? I know some of your remarks spoke to that, but it seems that that foundation was really critical to all the work you have discussed.
I'd be happy to. Go ahead, Alison, I'll go next.
I was just going to say that the students need to see responsiveness. They may want us to plan things for them, but what they really want is responsiveness so that they know they are heard. And then they need to be given the wherewithal, or they need to take the wherewithal to set up the questions themselves and the structures to begin to implement them themselves. We will work with them, but I think this emphasis on grad student agency is tremendously important.
Thank you. Josèe?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Alison. I think the students they want to be heard. They want a space where they can be heard, they can be listened to, and some of them are experiencing the moment in different ways, and we need to be there to listen. And in terms of faculty, I've found that holding forums, everybody's busy and it's hard to get participation. So I've tried to infuse into an existing structure rather than create a new structure that would require even more of our already stretched faculty and instructors.
Thank you, Josèe. Bill?
Yes, I think Josèe said something key there in terms of stretched, right? I mean, especially as we've gone through this last year with the Zoom meetings, but we've continued to have our workshops, and I found 2 things that have worked coming from opposite ends. So grad students will ask, well, there are different cultures in different labs, different supervisors. I'm like, yes, but who can push those are yourselves. If you ask the questions, your supervisor, your advisor will respond. And that's worked quite well. And then from the other side, I've been extremely lucky that when we have these workshops, they're not mandatory, but every one of my full professors show up. And my junior faculty see this. And they say, wait a minute, it's important to them, the ones who don't have to go because they're full professors, there's no repercussions, that kind of a thing. And they attend. And so now I'm hearing more and more about the examples that have been set in some of the labs percolating to the other labs, right? Discussions at group meetings and things like that. So it's coming up from both sides, the full professors and then the grad students themselves, putting a little bit of pressure or examples, I guess, showing examples that other people are taking on, and the momentum's great.
So to Bill, following up that, I mean, the signaling then from senior faculty within the department, and Alison, you were kind of speaking towards the signaling that came from your disciplinary society and the priority that AHA and MLA had placed in this space. Could you speak more towards the role you think of the professional societies in this space, Josèe and Bill, maybe from your own disciplines, and what that would mean, or other meaningful signals that you think can come from the internally or externally to really make this a priority of discussion amongst faculty and graduate students?
Well, for us, obviously, at the moment, history is on the table daily. And a lot of our students are moving more towards public history precisely because they know it needs to be addressed. And the AHA intervenes regularly in some of these arguments. Right now, there's issues about the National Archives, and the AHA has just published an opinion on that. We can't not do it. we can't not organize ourselves through our professional association. And I'm really proud of the chair now is a former UT Austin professor, Jackie Jones, and a wonderfully active manager, Jim Grossman, have stepped up.
Okay. In terms of public health, I think that the last year and a half has been really putting the spotlight in, maybe not on biostatistics directly, but definitely I'm part of the School of Public Health, and we've had really the spotlight. And the last year has really emphasized the impact of structural racism on the impact of the pandemic has not been the same across everyone and not across every student. So we've had a lot of, I think, guidance from societies to highlight these and maybe come closer to a solution and to try to work towards a better place for our students, but for also the entire field of public health as a whole.
So I'm aware that this is being recorded, so I'm trying to figure out the right words to talk about my professional society in this context. I'm not as positive or optimistic as Alison might have been with hers, I guess, would be the way I would say it. There are a lot of words. We see it in our, I've got one of our monthly magazines here in front of me still to read, and there are words in there, but I've not seen resources put behind things, right, in terms of thinking about change and improving. But what I can say is, if I think about the chemical engineers across the US, and there's some really key leaders who have come out in the last couple of years around equity, justice, inclusion, things like this, that are kind of leading the charge. Like, so there are groups that are forming, but these are not formal organizations, but they've got momentum and they've got strong enough leadership that they're using to make change that way.
Thank you for those candid reflections. I do see that AAU, in partnering with our member campuses and with our departments, we know that the identity of faculty is highly connected to their institution, but more so to the discipline for which they pursue their research and their scholarship. And so I think AAU is often looked at, how could we partner with disciplinary societies, knowing that they are a key lever for change, and where are their opportunities. So as we look to address racial justice within the academy, how do we maybe productively engage the disciplinary societies, knowing that they do signal and have influence and can resource efforts in collaboration with our institutions. So thank you for that thoughts. Feel free, anyone who has comments or reflections, to add them to the chat, or things you'd like to affirm. Would happy to see notes coming in from the participants that we have with us. I did want to raise an additional question with our panelists, and that I thought could be an interesting conversation, is that many of your programs were about convenings or town halls or meetings and places for faculty and graduate students to engage with each other or as collectively as a community. And we've transitioned to a very much remote place of work and of study. And what are your insights on in this engagement in this virtual space? Have there been benefits? Have there been limitations? What have you observed?
we have gone to using professionals. And so the reason I say that is because Zoom fatigue, to me, it was very obviously becoming real. Our graduate students did not respond well at all in virtual town hall meetings compared to the ones we had in person. I guess because they didn't have that support, that, you know, they were surrounded by their friends and colleagues, and so they would raise their hand in person. So what I found is, again, leveraging the things I have around me on grounds here, is there are people that they know how to do these things, right? They know how to engage, and they've gotten good practice over the last year and a half on doing it virtually. And so I bring in moderators for these kinds of things so that they can get things moving, they can get some exercises going and get some momentum going in Q&A.
Thank you, Bill.
Chemical engineers are not naturally, you know, exuberant, you know, in terms of Q&A sessions around topics like this.
Alison and Josèe?
Well, we haven't. I haven't noticed a problem with the town halls. I just looked over the recording of the fourth one, and it was run by the grad students. They circulated the agenda. They were COVID situation and financing and time to degree and what's going to happen to their fellowships and so forth. And those were urgent. And again, that was one of those times when I am amazed about how transparent we were. We talked numbers and we, and power structures and all sorts of stuff. I look forward to the next one, actually, though I will no longer be grad advisor, but I think faculty are welcome to attend, and they're very, I think they've been very successful. They're often passionate. The ones that gave birth to our equity committee, for instance, were very passionate. That's good, right?
Yes. And do you think go ahead, Josèe?
I just wanted to say that I want to say for the positive is we've had increased attendance because it's easier for people. They don't have to physically come. They can join from remotely. And also I've heard voices I haven't heard before. Some people won't speak up, but they don't mind putting something in the chat. So it has had some advantage.
Do you think going forward you'll stay in the virtual mode, Josèe, based on those benefits?
We're going hybrid for the fall and then see how that goes. I think there's definitely advantages to seeing each other face to face that we've all craving and missing the social contact. We'll see how the hybrid goes and go from there.
Very good. Last question that I would like to pose to you as a panelist is, Bill, you really obviously referenced a collaboration with expertise that was on your campus. Josèe, you referenced how different entities within BU came to help facilitate a targeted conversation and discussion in a set space. Alison, you've referenced, collaborations within the university as well. What advice do you have for faculty members or department chair, or someone who's more in another office that's on the line here? How do you think about fostering those connections, making those connections, and really enable, thinking about how you can benefit from the expertise that's within your own campus? Thoughts on just how to start to make some of those connections and bridges within your own campus?
If I can go first, I would say the first step is be aware of what's available at your university and on your campus. Ask questions, go to the right people, set up meetings. And that's what I did for our DEI committee. I just didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So find out what's available and what's missing. And that's how we came up with some of the discussions, is trying to complement the effort. So I would say ask questions, don't be afraid to set up meeting and go talk to people and forge those connections and find out what's already available before reinventing the wheel.
Thank you for reinforcing our theme and message, Josèe. Bill or Alison?
I agree. I mean, finding out who's out there is great. And we find ourselves turning again and again to the School of Education when we're trying to help students, which they are the professionals, and our students are certainly receiving much, much more pedagogy training than we ever did of my generation. So that's a great space for me, that connection.
Thank you.
For us, it's something similar. I mean, to know who's out there is critical, especially, again, being quite lucky to be an engineer in a liberal arts university, right? There's a lot of great people around me doing very different things. But also as an engineer and my colleagues, we're very, and I'm not saying that no one else is, but we always fall back on, well, you didn't show me the right data, or you didn't show me the data, right? And we're surrounded by people who not only know where the data are, they generate the data, they do the experiments, they run the labs that are coming up with these solutions and ideas to improve. And so that is another thing for us that we were looking for, people who were going to bring to the table, not just, okay, here's some best practices, but they're best practices based on these knowns, these data sets. And so that was another thing that we were looking for.
Thank you. Yes, so we've often found that having an understanding of the data, particularly in your own local context, is really critical for there to be productive conversations within the department level. So that is a cross-cutting theme we have seen. So encourage that. I just, we have about 15 minutes left in our time together. I think before we go to breakout discussions, I just wanted to offer the panelists if they had any final comments or remarks that they would want to make. I would like to open the floor to them.
I just want to say that I'm standing in today for our chair, Professor Dinah Rainey Berry. I am not replacing her.
Thank you so much. Josèe or Bill, any parting words?
Just thank you for the invitation and thank you for attending.
And thank you to my fellow panelists. I've learned from you, and I look forward to implementing some of your ideas.
Well, I would like to extend my thanks to you all and to my colleagues at AAU, Tara and Mira. You have worked tirelessly for this entire conversation series, and this was a wonderful conclusion to our series. For those of our guests online, we are going to now transition to breakout rooms. Thank you all for your engagement with our session. I know that our breakout room stayed to the last second and had more words to share. And I hope they were rich exchanges in your smaller group conversations as well. This concludes the Wheel Bazaar conversation series for the summer. All of the sessions have been recorded and are up on the website. And this really want to extend our great appreciation for the panelists and for the colleagues across the country that have engaged with us over this 8 weeks and eight sessions of rich conversation and exchanges. Thank you so much and have a wonderful, wonderful summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.